This episode of the Kingston Live podcast is brought to you by Grand Onstage. Get the most out of the Kingston Grand Theatre experience with access to pre-sale tickets, the best prices, and the best seats. Tickets for individual performances and subscriptions for the Grand Onstage season are on sale now at kingstongran.ca.
Honing and maintaining your craft is more than what a typical administrator would put in, or again, just back to the plumber example. A plumber isn't making sure that they're practicing plumbing for 8 hours a day. Right? Yep. So yes, music is to provide people fun and entertainment. So are movies. Can you go to the movies for free?
In concept, there's a lot of romance to a career as a musician. A life away from the office and onto the stage, driven by passion, creativity, and the pride of self-made success. All mixed with a stern defiance to the kinds of jobs we think of as traditional. That can be a part of a professional life in music. But a career is still a career, and the music world can be a challenging one. In order to be successful, musicians today need to take on a lot of non-musical work, from marketing and social media to transportation and even legal contracts. It's daunting to face that diversity of needs and still be the best you can be at your craft. Plus, touring comes with its own challenges, from navigating border crossings and work permits to just keeping your gear safe and insured. It's a tough career, but luckily, musicians aren't alone. This is Kingston Live, and today we're speaking with representatives from two organizations who make it their job to empower Canadian musicians. Liana White, Executive Director of the Canadian Federation of Musicians, and Aruna Handa of the Union of Professional Musicians. They join us to discuss how their organizations support musicians of all kinds and help make sure they're protected and fairly compensated.
Liana White, Executive Director of the Canadian Federation of Musicians, and Aruna Handa of Aruna and the Sirens, and also of Local 518, the Union of Professional Musicians here in Kingston. Welcome to the Kingston Live podcast.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
First off, Liana, just for clarity, what's the connection or the distinction between the Canadian Federation of Musicians, whom you represent, and Local 518 of the Union of Professional Musicians, whom Aruna is here representing today?
So we're all a part of what is the bigger parent union, if I may say, the American Federation of Musicians of the United States and Canada. So I work for I am the Executive Director of the Canadian National Office of the Union. We are headquartered in New York City, but again, the Canadian headquarters is Toronto, and we have 24 locals from coast to coast across Canada, 12 of which are in Ontario, and Kingston is one of them.
Is the appointment to Executive Director, is that a relatively new one?
It is not, no. They had various titles for my position in past, but I am the second executive director of the CFM. And in its history, although the AFM as a whole, as I described before, was founded in 1896, and many of our locals are well over 100 years old as well, the AFM didn't actually establish a Canadian head office until 1979.
How many locals are we talking about here?
Across U.S. and Canada is 200.
Wow.
And as I said, within Canada, we have 24 locals, and half of them are in Ontario because Ontario is so vast.
Right.
And although Quebec, actually I will digress for a moment, although Quebec is, I believe, larger than Ontario, they have only one local serving all of the province. So some provinces have more than one local, others only have one.
And
right.
Rob, I just wanted to say that actually it's no longer the Kingston office. It's now the Office of Eastern Ontario. So
covering Kingston, but
covering Kingston and Peterborough and Belleville.
Yeah.
It's kind of grown. They amalgamated some smaller locals. And
what would be, I don't have to reveal too many details or specifics, but how many members would say Local 518 or a local about the same size kind of represent?
So on this one, I can tell you that I did the newsletter this month as kind of my service to the union, and there were 370 recipients of the newsletter. And I think maybe 10 of them were recent additions. So we are really trying to grow the union because our local average age is, I think, around 40. And so we'd like to get more young musicians to join the local. And that's partly why this event is happening, the event that we've invited Liana to, which I guess by the time this is aired will have happened already. But that was everything you wanted to know about the union, but were afraid to ask because a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about the union. And they think, well, for example, when I first tried to join the union in my 20s, I was told vocalists can't join. I don't even know if that's true, but that's what I was told. And I'm a vocalist and I'm in the union. I'm a composer. I'm in the union. And so there's a lot of myths like that, I think, that need to be corrected.
Yeah, I'm not a musician, as I mentioned before we got into this. And many or most of our podcast listeners are probably just like me, local and live music lovers, although some of them certainly would be musicians. But as recorded music and live music performance consumers, we don't tend to think of musicians as quote unquote workers necessarily. And many might even wonder why musicians even need a union. Isn't making or performing music supposed to be fun?
Yeah, it's supposed to be fun, but fun doesn't pay the bills unless you want to just do an, open mic or you're doing this recreationally or what have you. We do have our weekend warriors as well. You've got your standard day job and what pays the bills, and then you still like to pick up some instruments and do a couple gigs on the weekend. That's fine and dandy. But when you're trying to make a career out of this, music is a trade. And no, you're not a blue collar worker per se in the traditional, I'm a, pipe fitter, plumber, etc. But it is a trade. It is work. Most musicians start their craft when they are young. Anywhere between 5 and 10 years old is when you start taking music lessons. And to become a professional musician, the rehearsal time that needs to go into honing and maintaining your craft is more than what a typical administrator would put in, or again, just back to the plumber example. A plumber isn't making sure that they're practicing plumbing for 8 hours a day. Right? So yes, music is to provide people fun and entertainment. So are movies. Can you go to the movies for free? Do the actors work for free?
Screen Actors Guild, right? The Writers Guild. And those unions recently went on strike and won concessions. So I feel like the arts world, and I think in particular musicians, we're the worst organized from the perspective of not getting our due. We've been watching our revenues be shrunk consistently, and it's like we have such little money, and then the corporate interests come and take what's left. I mean, the latest thing that's happened, apart from the Spotify fiasco, is that there are so many people now who sell merch to try to make a living. And when they sell the merch now, the venues are saying they want 40% off the top. They don't pay for the merch. The musician does. Like, if somebody said that to me, I would have to say, well, then I'm not going to sell any merch because then I'll be paying you for the privilege of selling merch here. So I feel like the Musicians Union has an opportunity, and it does this work, to try to represent the values and needs of musicians to be able to continue to be professional. Because if we don't get enough money from our work, we're going to become dilettantes. We're going to become amateurs, and it's going to lower the quality of music overall, and it's going to lower the quality of the compositions because we are going to be weekend warriors. So it's really important to me, I think, and that's why I joined the union, is to basically say, look, we have to get organized. We can't complain about all of this happening to musicians. We have to start organizing and getting a bit of a grip on what's happening with the music
It's such a
industry.
different lens to look at music through. For someone like myself, especially trying to wrap my head around it, because I'm not a musician and I don't make money playing music. But even you just mentioned venues, for example. We as live music lovers go into these venues for the fun and the entertainment of seeing a live performance, not recognizing that it's a workplace for those performing musicians, right? And so just even wrapping my head around that, I'm starting to realize, okay, well, they're up there earning a living.
And it is a fun thing. Like,
yeah.
we want you to come and we want you to have fun. We don't want you to feel like, oh no, are they making enough money? Because that's kind of our job, to make sure that we're making enough money, you know, and to say no to gigs that are good. There are some people in Toronto, some places in Toronto that charge musicians to play in their venues. They charge them. That's crazy to me. And musicians,
what is the union stance on something like that?
Pay to play is no, absolutely not. You should not be paying to play because that venue is there. You're providing a musical service as a musician, and patrons are going to come and stay longer and buy an extra drink or have that appetizer and a meal and a drink. You know, so it's bringing business into the venue. If there's music, if there's live entertainment, people are apt to stay longer. Also, there's going to be a sound person. And that sound person is not going to work for free. They get a guarantee all the time, even when a band is given a jar or a jug and it's love offerings and donations. And sure, there are musicians who clean up on that. But the bar owner or the venue owner it's win-win for them because they're not paying the artist, but they're reaping the benefit from the artist being there.
How much of the union's job is about educating not musicians and you know, the musicians and the members that you serve, but educating the market and venues and the industry, other dimensions of the industry? It sounds to me like there's just a level of ignorance maybe that seems to be pervasive that you're probably battling. I
will give the benefit of the doubt and say some of it's ignorance and some of it is just blatant exploitation. Listen, musicians want to perform. They want to, and I get that. And I hope the passion in my voice of understanding that is coming through, because I do get that musicians want to be on stage. They want to perform. So what we walk is a balance of understanding that our artists want to do this, and they do need these opportunities for these smaller venues and just to kind of cut their teeth. But you know what? That's more what an open mic is for, to get in front of an audience, to be able to perform your music, refine your live performance. And I mean, I don't want to digress here, but a live performance is different than a recorded performance. So you might have a fabulous recording, but you don't translate well live until you get more experience with that, and vice versa. So there's not that understanding for that, but there should be at least some form of guarantee, no matter how small the venue, because you are bringing value to the venue with your music. And education, sorry, I kind of have gone off your question there. Our focus is to educate and empower musicians first and foremost. We will always work with anybody who wants to engage musicians. We even have funding programs where, depending on what the type of engagement is, we have funding of up to 50% if you pay the artists. So there's all these different avenues where we will work with venues or engagers. Through those means, we're educating them. But we'd like to see musicians stand together to not undercut each other. And it's not that way. I don't want it to come across that way. But when you take a free opportunity, what that does is open the door for a venue to say, well, yeah, you might be a better musician who commands money, but most people don't really notice, and this person's for free or this band's for free, so I'm going to go with them. So to limit the options of the ability to have venues say, yeah, no, you know what, this one will play for $50, you want $100. No. So what we want to do is, it's a minimum wage. At the end of the day, everybody understands minimum wage. Musicians should earn a minimum wage, and that's really what we're after. And actually, the city of Kingston is one that does recognize union tariffs.
So I also want to just say that for prospective members who are thinking about joining the union, I know one of the hesitations is that they think if they join the union, they can't play at a free gig, or they can't play for their brother-in-law's wedding, or whatever it happens to be. But that's actually not the case. The union doesn't make you only do union or union tariff gigs. It's actually rather trying to situate the whole music industry in such a way that all gigs will be giving people a living wage, who are playing music. But they don't prohibit you from playing a free gig. And I think that what Liana was saying about some gigs, when I've got new material and things like that, I sometimes take my new material to a festival or something where I may not be being paid very much money, but I get a broader swathe of people because they're not already my fans, and I get some feedback about what people think about that song, et cetera. So I think the union would never say, Aruna, don't do that. Don't pay your band. But I have a band, and so I pay them the union tariff. And that sometimes means I can't bring my whole band to some gigs because I just can't afford it. And it also means sometimes I'm losing money when I go to a gig because I just didn't get enough revenue from the door or whatever to cover everybody. And because often musicians as well, Liana, you probably hate to hear this, but often I've played in places in Toronto where I, as a musician, have to pay the sound person, not the bar. And where the bar is saying, if we don't have revenue of like $1,200 plus, then you have to give us $200 as a kind of deposit for that gig. And that is kind of a standard thing. And the weird thing about that is they don't tell people, buy your booze down here, because if you buy your booze at any of the other bars in this joint, that's not going to count toward the musician's amount to get that,
Wow, I'm shocked to hear that because I was not aware of all those little intricacies. Actually, I had never heard that a band has to pay the sound person.
Oh, yeah, that's happened a lot in Toronto.
Okay, so the one thing I will say is that no musician should have to pay any SOCAN fees. That is one thing that some engagers do try to put in. A venue is actually the entity that is to be paying SOCAN fees.
And enlighten our listeners, SOCAN is?
The Society of Authors hold on. Oh my goodness, I'm so used to SOCAN. It basically
Society of
you've got
Composers, Authors,
and muse.
And what's the N? Composers, authors, and...
Oh, my goodness. Because we're so used to it. I'm so we're speaking lingo here, and I do know.
I didn't actually expect you to try and decode the acronym.
Yeah. Okay.
But
anyway,
SOCAN is the organization that collects.
SOCAN is the organization. They fall under copyright law.
Yeah.
When a gym, for instance, they're playing music, their clientele are benefiting from the fact that there's music. So there are revenues that gym would have to pay for playing that music. That goes back to the artists. That goes back to the composers and Canada. Society of, oh my goodness.
Composers and
Canada. Of Canada. There we go.
Then I don't get why there's an N there then.
Of Canada.
It's Can for Canada.
Anyway.
Okay,
oh my gosh.
So I'm a composer, so I'm a member of SOCAN.
Right. Yes.
And when I play a gig, I have to submit my playlist, and then I will get many months later a check.
So your works are registered with SOCAN?
Yeah. Every time I compose a new piece, I register it with SOCAN. Right. They're basically collecting my rights. And that will happen like if CBC plays my tune, then I get money also from that. So it's not just for venues, but also for...
So once in a while you get a surprise check in the mail?
I get a surprise direct deposit.
Oh, nice. Fancy. Yeah. But that doesn't make sense if a musician's paying their SOCAN fees. Isn't that like paying your...
No, they shouldn't. That's the whole point. Is my point is that there are engagers who have tried to write that in. We are not paying SOCAN fees. You've got to pay SOCAN fees, especially if they're going to do cover tunes and such. Right. That's where this falls in. At any rate, these are the things that venues should be paying the sound person. Venues should not be charging back, oh, you have to pay for the fact that you performed here. It's one thing if you're going to rent a private room because you're doing an album release. They're not engaging you. You're putting on a party for your album release. I don't want anybody to be confused by something like that. Yes, then you're paying for a space. You're holding the event. But when you are engaged
when you're
or
the
invited, right, that's different. So it shouldn't be that way. And unfortunately, it's come away from that. And it did not used to be like that for very many years. Musicians were always paid well. And because it's been on my mind, I do want to tell the story because we are in Kingston. The Tragically Hip were very big union members. And when they were first performing was when it was a lot better with venues paying artists and paying them right.
And there were CDs that people bought
and CDs
instead of
that,
streaming,
exactly,
et cetera, or records.
But one of the situations that happened with them before they were very well known, they did get stiffed on a gig. And one of the things that the union does is that when a band is touring and they don't get paid, we will make sure that they have money to get to their next gig. And if there is any merit in doing so, we will pursue collection from the venue at no cost to the artist. And the Tragically Hip were actually benefactors of that. And, they had even had, I think they did bowling jackets at one point and asked for permission to put the logo on their jackets. Like, they were very proud. I tell this story again only because we're in Kingston.
I love that story.
But it's a fabulous story for anywhere, but it is a very true story. And
I think that speaks to this whole idea of like being a part of something bigger, right? Instead of being a lone musician out there at a club who's maybe being assaulted by the owner because you're a woman, and that's another issue, or maybe that you're not actually being treated very well by the original deal, isn't being honored, as all of those things. When you're a member of the union, you've got some people you can also tell the other musicians through the union, like, hey, listen, this place, watch out here. There's a problem here with this venue. So I think that for all those reasons, and there's so many more reasons, like to join the union, it's almost a no-brainer. Like, I don't know why people wouldn't. Well,
you mentioned that Liana, you're here visiting Kingston for the special event called Everything You Want to Know About the Musicians Union, but we're afraid to ask. Yeah. And I'm just wondering what message you're bringing with you, what message are you hoping to land at that event? I'm assuming many of the audience will be musicians themselves. I would hope so, yes. And really just the collectivism, that you are not in this alone. And there are other associations out there, I'll speak to that, touch on them in a moment, that do definitely help a musician's career. But there's power in numbers. We also do things like lobby for copyright reform. So the more members we have, the more that we can be effective in government and in legislative decisions that are going to help musicians and arts and culture on a whole. So we are a voice for musicians. We are also, we negotiate with the National Film Board of Canada, with the CBC, with film producers for both live score and music licensing when your recorded works go into commercials or film or television series. So it provides us more strength to represent artists on a whole, so musicians can all get a bigger piece of the pie. This episode of Kingston Live is brought to you by Grand Onstage. Grand Onstage takes you beyond the regular Kingston Grand Theatre experience. It's a subscription option that gives you access to pre-sale tickets, the best prices, and the best seats. That means you can customize your own individual package starting at just 4 performances. Want to bring friends? Subscriber pricing applies to their tickets too. And if your plans change, just exchange your tickets for another performance. Tickets for individual performances and subscriptions for the Grand Onstage season are on sale now at kingstongrand.ca. Aruna, you shared some of the misperceptions you had about the union prior to joining, and as well as some misperceptions that you've encountered from other musicians out there. Part of your talk is everything you want to know about the musicians union, but we're afraid to ask. What are some of the questions that musicians may be afraid to ask, or that might be on their minds? That tomorrow's event might be a great forum for them to get those questions answered.
I believe Aruna hit on it, like, I can only do union gigs, or I can't always meet the guarantees, like what the union establishes as the minimum wage.
But let me just ask, is there a certain kind of musician who the union is for, and maybe another kind of musician that the union's not for? Who would be?
No, we represent musicians in all genres of music and in all forms of music. So if it's live recorded, it doesn't matter. Live and recorded works and all genres.
You don't ever have to perform on a stage. You could be a songwriter who composes and records.
Many of our members are songwriters. Many of our members are also composers, which can be a little different than somebody who's a performing musician, a session player. Here would be one misconception, is that the union is only beneficial to more organized musicians like theater pits and symphony orchestras or session players. So not the feature artist, but all the backup musicians who are going to be in the studio doing all the studio.
That's a prevalent misconception.
Right. That
a
is.
lot of people
yes.
think
So that would be that's back to your, initial question. And so it's like the union is not for me because I'm an indie artist. I'm a singer-songwriter and I'm what we would term as a leader. So if you're the feature performer, the leader, and you're hiring musicians to be part of your band, like Aruna has actually said that she does, she would be like, well, when you're kind of that hybrid, you are a musician, you're a performing artist, but you're also an employer in a way because you're engaging other musicians. And we would expect Aruna to pay her musicians, which she's obviously said she does, and sometimes to her own financial loss, but to make sure they're coming out to support her engagement. It's hopefully going to lead to more for her, but she needs those musicians to supplement her performance. Right?
It's really interesting because some musicians have very intentional and well-planned musical careers, while maybe others don't. I don't know if anyone gets into music because they want to be considered an employer or, a business necessarily.
No, I don't think so.
But, I think whether you're an amateur just starting out or a serious and disciplined student, maybe with a music career as a goal, at what point in a musician's career should, an average Canadian musician consider joining the musicians union? Like, when is the right time?
I would say when they're thinking about doing their first recording and when they've broken out, like really starting to break out of their local market. Because then you want to start talking about insurance, for instance, and insurance in the way of the more that you're going to take your instruments out on the road, the higher the risk of theft, loss, damage. So you want to think about insurance. Then also when you do start recording, and for indie bands, like we have agreements to fit every type of situation. So for instance, you're just starting to emerge as an indie band, you're going to do a full-length album, not just a couple singles. Then you want to, let's say, memorialize this agreement and what's going on. Because at the beginnings, everybody's getting along and everybody's happy and we're all into this together. So what we do is we have agreements that the band themselves can basically register all the songs and state the percentage of creative input, ownership. So one person might have written everything for this one song on the album, but another one of the band did it for another song. Yep. So where you are doing your first full-length recording, you are going to want to have that in paper. You're not going to be able to necessarily afford a lawyer. So we are, I'd also like to say that the union in a nutshell should be looked at as the legal and the political end of the music industry. And we provide you with the tools to protect your works as a band and as individual artists. There has been many, many instances where, there's bigger name bands and they break up, and then there is a dispute over who's got ownership over a song, and then they get into legal battles. What we have put in place is just a mechanism to officially put in writing what percentages
before the record is finished, before it's even recorded.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So I did that with my band, and it's very complicated. If there's, let's say, 9 people playing on one song, then there's a percentage that they each get for the actual performance part of it. And also, this only kicks in once all the expenses for putting that record together are covered, because even though, for example, in my case, we got a factor grant, we got an Ontario Arts Council grant, but it didn't cover the whole cost of that record simply because COVID happened and made everything super expensive. It really did. It really did. And this album that I started in 2019 is only coming out now because I had to keep working to try to get a little bit of money to cover those expenses, and even still, that's happening. So
it's interesting to me because I see, being someone who takes in a lot of live music, many artists, bands look like they're having a lot of fun up there on stage when they're performing their original music, or even if it's covers and things like that. There's definitely an element of fun. I would imagine that musicians want to have fun performing their music.
They're entertainers.
Yeah, they're entertainers.
They do. And, I know a number of musicians they're larger than life on stage when they're performing, but then ask them to do a speaking gig. And it's a totally different situation. They're in their, performance persona when they're on stage, and they love doing what they do. Absolutely. I mean, there's no question about it. And I'm not going to say that they don't have fun. And Aruna, this came up earlier in our conversation. Of course they are. They're entertaining people. That's what they enjoy doing.
It's not.
But they still need to that does not pay the rent. They still need to eat,
Yeah. And what? It's funny because, I was going to say, it looks like they're having so much fun. There's an element of fun to being in a band.
Oh, yeah.
Do you meet resistance from musicians because, the union deals with aspects of music that are maybe unfun or maybe,
yes.
And this is really going to kill the fun of our band.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it like that, but they want the flexibility to be able to do what they want to do. And I understand that. And we don't want to take that away. But what we want to limit is, hey, just don't give it away for free. So we've had this come up a lot. I want to play for this charity and I want to donate my services. What we say to them is still get paid, because then there's other protections involved. For instance, they're going to perform and somebody's going to actually, listen, an iPhone is high quality now, but can take high quality video. But let's say they're doing this charitable gig or this gig for charity, and somebody records it and then,
distributes
it for their own financial gain with nothing back to the artist.
Right.
Okay. So what is best is to always have a contract protection, which prohibits the recording for commercial distribution by another party. If a band wants to record their performance and have it on their own website for their own promotional purposes, that is not a huge deal. It is when somebody is going to take that content and use it for their own financial gain and not give back to the musicians. And it's happened more often than you would think. So what our contracts would do is like, okay, let's still put it under contract, get the money, because there can also be pension. That's another thing that we provide to musicians. So if you have it under contract, it's all registered, and you really believe in this cause, just write them a check, or not write them a check. Sorry, I've dated myself here. Send them an e-transfer for their money back. You know what I mean? Like, so there's ways to do it. Don't necessarily, you can still donate to your cause, but let's cover the performance in a professional way. And if you want to take every cent you've earned and give it back to that charity, do it. We don't care, but don't do it for free.
I just love that. Like that. Like I'm just learning so much just sitting here right beside Liana, because we're often asked that question. Like, could you do it for free? And I used to say yes, and now I say no. I've been asked to perform at gigs for charity where the male musicians are paid, but the women musicians are not being paid. That's disgusting. Yeah. And I have also found online on YouTube concerts of mine put on YouTube, and then they're getting revenues. They're getting revenues from that. Mm-hmm. And so these are real stories that really happen. Yeah.
And it almost seems like if I'm understanding correctly, you have maximum fun once all this other stuff is taken care of. With the union on your side and the collective empowerment, I think was the word that you had. It'll keep things fun for bands and artists.
And I will give a little plug to some of these other associations that I had hinted at earlier in this conversation, because there are entities out there that provide opportunities. There are showcases. There are free performances that you can do to get that, dare I say, exposure, because we don't like to use that word so much in the union circles because you die from exposure. But what I'm saying to you, there are ways to get exposure. So we're in Ontario. There is Music Ontario. There are entities like the
Folk Alliance International.
Folk Alliance International. Folk Music Ontario, which is soon to, Folk Music Ontario.
Canada Music Ontario.
Yeah, it is Canada, really folk music.
Folk on Canada,
Canada, Folk Canada. But at any rate, these are entities that bring in buyers from festivals. They bring in agents and labels and managers.
It's like
and
a conference.
they give you a platform. Sometimes it's in a conference aspect, and then sometimes they put on events where they showcase artists and they're bringing the attention to the artists. And sometimes they're paid. They are sometimes paid. I know Folk Music Ontario is actually a big advocate for paying their artists, even though they're giving them all of this opportunity. I know Folk Music Ontario does as well.
Canadian Music Week pays a little bit too. Canadian Music Week does also.
And CIMA, Canadian Independent Music Association. So there are entities there that are providing opportunities to artists. And maybe sometimes they're paid opportunities and sometimes they're not. But what the artist is getting is the benefit of industry there that is going to, they're getting that nod from industry. They're getting that recognition from industry. And there might be, it might be for some labels and it might not be. And it might be for some agents and managers and it may not be. But there are ways of doing this without having to give a club owner a free performance or actually, a paid performance because you're paying them to perform in their venue and bring business into their venue.
Aruna, you're here as a member of Local 518 of the union. What was the kicker for you? At one point you weren't a member of the union, but what was the deciding factor for you that?
Well, I think partly was having my ignorance squashed, really, because I had, as I said, when I was, in my 20s, I did try to join the union and was told that vocalists couldn't be a member, and really that it was mostly for orchestral members and things like that. Then I discovered that wasn't true, but my biggest motivation was the fact that the Screen Actors Guild and the writers were organizing and actually clawing back some of the control that the corporate interests were having on their art. And I felt like this is a big problem for musicians. When we went from physical objects like records and CDs that we sold and we went to streaming, most musicians I know make nothing from streaming, make very little money. There are exceptions to that, like Bandcamp will give musicians a much bigger percentage, like around 80+% of the money that goes through that for a musician, which compares very favorably with something like Spotify where you get 0.000 whatever it is. So I think for me, it was the opportunity to be part of a bigger group of musicians. As Liana was saying, the strength in numbers that we could actually start to leverage things. Also, it is a lot of work to be a musician, right? You have to become an expert in so many different things now because we don't make enough money to hire people anymore. Record companies aren't really interested unless you're Taylor Swift. So you've got to learn how to do all this stuff from social media to promotion to figuring out your artwork or who to hire to do all of that stuff takes time. So if there's an organization that's willing to say, hey, you need a contract, here's a contract. Hey, do you need a checklist because you want to go to the States on tour? Here's a checklist. And provides you with all of this legal and professional stuff to make your life easier. Oh my goodness, let me have 2 scoops of that because I feel completely overwhelmed with all the kind of what I call admin work that it takes now to be a musician.
Liana, I understand that you are an authority on cross-border immigration requirements for musicians. Here in Kingston, we're a quick hop across the water to the U.S., and some local acts have ventured across the border for shows or tours. I think many of us don't think too much about crossing the border. There's a bridge down the road. We just drive over anytime, even a ferry that goes over from Kingston. But what challenges exist today for Canadian musicians that requires the kind of expertise that you've required on this?
So for one, just because, and this is it's the biggest angst for border town musicians, let's just say, because it's like, oh, well, it's just there. I've been going there since I was a kid. But when you're going there to work, you have to remember that music is work and you are potentially displacing a U.S. act. And I know musicians don't think that way. U.S. artists don't think that way. They don't. But it's the way that labor looks at it. Right. It's the way that governments look at it. And, there's a very America first attitude across the border there. So you have to take those things into consideration. At the end of the day, there is a visa process. It is what is required by the United States government for anybody that's going into work and make money in the United States. And it's actually not even only if you're going to make money. Let's just say you are going over for a free gig, but the venues will have a 2-drink minimum per customer, or you have to buy a meal and whatever. If anybody is making money off your performance, you require a visa. Even if it's not you, you are required to have a visa. Now, if you're going over, let's say we brought up Folk Alliance International earlier that, comes into Canada once every 5 years, and next year will be, but it's usually in the United States. That is a conference where, it's an industry conference, so that you wouldn't require an official visa that you have to pay money for. But, that's one of the things that we do is we help navigate and let you know when you need a visa, when you don't need a visa, what's entailed, what you should be watching out for. Again, I talked about more equipment and liability insurance before. Well, what I didn't touch on too much is liability, and I'm going to digress again. Sorry, so much information. But there are venues that will not engage musicians unless they have proof of their own liability insurance. That is something that we help musicians.
Which was
it's 10 years new.
Yeah.
It's about 10 years new.
It's crazy.
It's new.
Because
it's really interesting because, over the past few weeks in the news, as the U.S. election heats up, international trade has come into the spotlight again as a result of certain comments by a certain presidential candidate.
Yes.
Does that have the union worried about what challenges might be introduced should a change in president happen in the U.S. In terms of the export of Canadian
party?
Yeah.
Or a change in because it's going to be a change in president.
Policy.
Are we talking a change in party or a change in president? Because that's.
But words have been said, and will that present challenges for the export of Canadian music or musicians looking to work?
We know that there's going to be certain policy mandates depending on the party. Right now, it's political rhetoric, and how many political promises have failed. You're saying what you can say right now to get elected. Yes, some of it's true, but we can't sweat bullets over every little word that's said, because what they're saying right now is for the purposes of, they think that the people that they believe is their voting bloc, what they want to hear. And then they'll deal with whatever comes in later. So yes, there's a worry that what is actually going to come true. Sure there is. But as for its impact on artists' mobility, we're not too worried. When they talk trade, they're talking about hats and lumber and oil and big stuff. They're not really concerned too much about arts and culture.
Right. Gotcha. So sorry.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to that? Because one of the questions that I've been really curious about is there is a lot of bureaucracy around Canadians going and touring. Like now we have to wait 185 days potentially for a response to a visa request.
Yeah.
And if we don't want to wait that long, we have to pay $2,800 in addition to the $500.
Okay, I will quickly explain that part. So what it is right now is there's 2 service centers that adjudicate visas for any artist coming into the United States, not just Canadians. So this is not a target on Canadians. It's not a target on the arts and culture either, because this is affecting anyone who needs to come into the United States for a visa. You could be a scientist, for instance, okay? What is happening right now is that one of the adjudication centers is in a severe state of backlog. We only recently found out a week ago that this center that is in the backlog state, causing some visas to be delayed for up to 6 months, potentially up to 6 months, just moved offices. So now I speculate it's the move that impacted the delay.
The California office.
The California Service Center. So the question might be, well, why are you sending our files to California then if they're in such a backlog? Well, because we don't have a choice. We used to be able to send directly to these adjudication centers. USCIS changed its filing policies where now we have to send all of our petitions to a Texas distribution center, and then Texas decides where they're going to send the files, and we have no idea how they make those decisions. We have been lobbying both independently and as part of a very large lobbying group to get answers from USCIS. We have yet to get answers. The closest thing to an answer that we got was California moved. So one can only assume that the move has impacted their ability to process visas. So right now, it's luck of the draw. Your file ends up in Vermont and you're going to get it in no time and you're not going to sweat bullets, or you're going to go to California and you're potentially going to have to dig deep in your pockets or cancel your tour or rearrange your dates. I hope nothing is coming across as callous. I don't mean that, because our hearts are breaking over this. We are doing everything that we can to mitigate the situation as best as possible for artists. We were completely blindsided by this. Unfortunately, this is the beast we have to deal with. If you want to perform in the United States professionally, this is what's going on. But what I will also say, to make Canadians feel a little bit better, I hope, about the situation, is that they're better off than artists coming into the United States from anywhere else in the world, because those individuals then have to go through a consular process to obtain their visa at a U.S. consulate first, up to an additional 100 days. So,
but one question I have, Liana, though, is because I see American artists coming into Canada and they don't have this process that they have to go through.
Because it changed here in Canada, and that's a way deeper dive, which I can get into later. It is U.S. artists, and it's not just U.S. artists, it's artists from anywhere else in the country. So if you want to talk about Australia also has visa fees. They're $400 a musician, whereas U.S. is a blanket fee for up to 25 musicians. So people look at the U.S. more because, again, of the border, the close proximity. It depends on where you're coming in from, the wherever.
So Americans coming into Canada, they don't have to go through that
anyone
process.
from any other country coming into Canada may need a visa depending on the situation. For a live bar gig that is, it's a handful of live bar gigs, no, they don't need a visa. That's correct. So comparable to you and the work that you're doing, if you're playing venues, big or small, and it's just a couple of performances, yes, you're absolutely correct. U.S. musicians or musicians from anywhere else in the world have a much easier time getting into Canada.
Which is great. I'm not upset about that. I just want it to be the reverse.
They changed I believe it was 2014, Canada had actually changed the visa process system, but they changed it to be absolutely horrendous for when it came to musicians, where they were putting everything on the first venue and it was $250 a musician, and the employer had to pay, not the artist. Then there was a big upheaval during that time because a band was coming here on tour and they're like, you're going to make us pay as the first venue $250 a head. So then it was quickly overturned. So that's it in a nutshell, because it was too punitive. They went from too punitive to too lax, is really what it is. And there are situations where U.S. artists do still need a visa, but not in the situation when they're coming in to play a handful of bar gigs. No.
This is someone who's not a musician and just really just a music lover. This is supremely educational for me. I mean, we are down a rabbit hole I never even imagined existed. But all that said, are these issues, these disparities, are these something that the union has a voice in the matter? Are these issues that the union's actively working on with others at various levels of?
Yes. The one thing that we're not, I mean, there are factions of our membership who are pushing us to get in front of the Canadian government again to make it harder for Americans to come in. But then that is, we don't want to punish American musicians. We don't feel comfortable to do that. We don't, because then it's going to look like we're being punitive. Some people want us to do this, some don't. We do need to level the playing field, and what we're trying to do is level it more on the U.S. end, because we need to bring that down. So yes, we actively work on that, and we actively work on it with like Carnegie Hall is one of the entities that are part of our lobby group, the Recording Industry Association of America. There is an entity called A2IM, which would be the equivalent of SEMA here. We work together, Folk Alliance International, again, they're getting a lot of plug today. At any rate, we work with all of these entities. And so it's the AFM, because that is our American end that has to lobby American government. So we're always looking for ways to make it easier for Canadian musicians to get into the United States.
It's not fair, right? Like we're supposed to have this free trade agreement. There are something like 1,200 professions that don't need a visa at all to go across the border. For example, dentists can work on either side of the border, no problem. But musicians, like again, the ones that have so little money are the ones that are being crushed with these fees, et cetera, and delays and time and all kinds of...
Well, it sounds to me that you've got an important ally in that fight in the union, for sure.
We do.
Liana, you've been doing work like this for, I think I read in your bio, close to 30 years or something like that.
Yes, that's right. 29 years. 29 in February.
I sense a passion in you that...
Oh, yes.
And I don't know what ignited that passion or what inspires you to keep going, but... it seems like you're driven by a noble cause, and you see a better future down the road.
I do. I would say I think I'm just, there's the people that are for the underdog, and there's the people that are the dogs. I'm not the dog. I'm a rabid dog when I am fighting for the underdog, but other than that, I'm not. So I just came into this by dumb luck, and then just developed a passion for it, and helping musicians, and I believed in what the union was trying to achieve for musicians. And it really has become a passion. I was going to get into law, and then I found that, the gig kind of gave me that, because as I said before, the legal and political end of the music industry, I do get to lobby. I get to write contracts and read bylaws, like I said
Yuck.
And
I almost wish I was a musician just so I could have you in my corner.
Oh, there you go. There you go. I love it. Thank you.
It's not too late.
Thank you.
It's not too late, Rob.
Yeah.
Aruna, I have to ask you, I asked you earlier what really motivated you to become a member of the union. I sense that you too almost have a vision for a better future, and I wanted to know, what does that better future look like for you as a musician?
I think for me, it looks like musicians cooperating and joining forces to identify the real combatants when we're trying to figure out getting a living wage for musicians. I went to St. John's, Newfoundland for the Canadian Folk Music Awards because my single was nominated, and every musician I asked, I was like, are you in the union? Because I really want us all to join the union so that we can leverage some control and power in the same way that the Screen Actor Guild did, and in the same way that the Writers Guild did. And so that's my primary motivation. But I have to say, since I've joined, I've learned so much. And that's just since January. And actually, it was Michael Broadhead who was the one who I was starting to play music with him, voice and bass. And he was a big advocate of music. He's actually a member of the board of the local 518. So he was kind of championing it. And then once I joined, I am still learning. Even today, sitting on this couch, I am learning from Liana about what other services and things that the union does. But I also want to say, I really feel it's important that musicians who join the union also understand that we have to give some service back to the greater good of the union, of all of us. And so that's partly why I'm organizing that event tomorrow night, because I figure I'm not the only person who's got questions about the union. And I also did the newsletter and a few other things, but I feel like I don't want people to come. It's like what Kennedy said, right? Don't ask what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. And I feel like that's also the attitude that's going to have to be the locomotive that pushes people to the union, because we need to pool our resources and make it better for all of us so that we can not be surprised when someone pays us a decent wage because we're performing good music.
Well, and what could the rest of us do? So, I'm sitting here as a live and recorded music consumer. What can we be doing to better support?
Well, at least subscribe to YouTube Music and don't download music for free, because even though it is micro pennies that trickle down to the artists on subscriptions, at least it's micro pennies and not taking music for free. and also
or
just
Bandcamp, because Bandcamp is a really great resource. People have bought homes with their revenue.
So we should
from
seek
Bandcamp.
out those services that are compensating bands and artists.
Yeah. And, obviously if there's a venue where there's not, a ticket and whatever, and you do see a jug going around to donate, then please do donate, to the band, and just know that they are workers. Some of them have, they do have children or will have children. They have mouths to feed, including their own. They have houses or rents to pay, and their instruments. What they don't realize too, like their tools of trade are very, very expensive. So to appreciate that they're not just there for entertainment, but it's a job.
All of these other things is a great place for people like you to
value
start.
the musician. Value the musician is what I would say.
This has been amazingly insightful. Thank you so much for taking an evening out to talk to us here on Kingston Live.
Thank you for inviting us.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
This was a blast. I really learned a lot. I'm like, wow, my eyes have been opened here.
Yeah.
This has been Kingston Live. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it, tell a friend, or subscribe on your platform of choice. For show listings, artist info, and all things Kingston music, check out kingstonlive.ca. Kingston Live was produced in Kingston by Soundwise. Hosted by Rob Howard. Voiceovers and technical production by John Sanfilippo. Writing and research by Peter Sanfilippo. Executive producer Rob Howard. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@kingstonlive.ca.